She walked into the grand hall wearing a worn-out uniform, the name Isabella quietly pinned to her chest. No one looked at her. No one cared. To them, she was just the janitor, silent, invisible, forgettable. But when she was asked to step on stage as a last-minute replacement, no one could have predicted what happened next. Within minutes, the woman they once dismissed had the entire room on its feet in thunderous applause. From that moment on, no one dared to underestimate her. Again, Isabella Moore stepped into the grand lobby of Rosehill Conservatory, with her head slightly bowed, her faded gray uniform blending into the marble and gold surroundings. No one paid her any mind. She was just part of the background, a quiet presence with a cart of cleaning supplies that rolled softly across the polished floors. At 28, Isabella had worked here for 3 years. Day after day passed like a wordless melody, silent, repetitive, and overlooked. Students and faculty, wrapped in tailored coats and ambition, barely saw her. Their eyes moved past her as though she were a shadow, necessary but invisible. Her uniform seemed to absorb the light, contrasting starkly with the brilliant notes of Chopin drifting from behind closed practice room doors. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a low, neat bun, her face calm, though her eyes always searched. Eyes that once knew music intimately, but now only watched it from afar. She stopped for a moment to straighten a slightly tilted portrait of an old composer, then resumed her route, her calloused hands moving with a grace that didn't match the mop she carried. It was the kind of movement that belonged to something softer, something finer, if anyone had ever bothered to notice. "Isabella, can you cover the reception hall today? The Harmony Trust Board members are stopping by," called Mr. Grant. Her supervisor, not even glancing up from his clipboard. "Yes, sir," she replied softly, shifting direction toward the grand reception area, a space filled with soaring columns and tall windows that bathed the room in golden afternoon light. In the corner stood a Ravenscroft grand piano, the jewel of many past fundraisers and recitals. Isabella's eyes drifted to it for just a second. In the polished brass of a floor lamp nearby, she caught a faint reflection of herself. Not the woman holding a feather duster, but the girl she used to be, 13 years old, seated in front of a similar piano, eyes full of light, a future brimming with unwritten symphonies. That was before the music paused, before a life shaped by love, not ambition, nudged her off course. The moment passed. She blinked, shook her head ever so slightly, and kept walking. The past was the past, she reminded herself. She had made peace with it, or at least she told herself that every morning. Even when echoes of long-lost melodies stirred in the walls of this place, even when her fingers itched to feel ivory under skin rather than latex gloves, Isabella kept her rhythm steady and her presence quiet. This was her life now, and she would carry it with dignity, even if no one else saw it. "Isabella, those chairs are supposed to be exactly 1 inch apart, not this haphazard mess," snapped a crisp voice across the hall. It was Melanie Sharp, head piano instructor at Rosehill, gliding across the floor in sharp heels and a perfectly pressed navy blazer. Her hair, silver blonde and flawlessly styled, swayed with practiced authority as she moved. At 51, Melanie was a name that still carried weight in international music circles, and she wore that reputation like a tailored, dirt-fitted, cold, and uncompromising. Isabella didn't flinch. "Of course, Miss Sharp," she said, her voice steady as she knelt to adjust the spacing of the chairs one by one. From a distance, the rhythm of her movements looked almost like choreography, quiet and intentional. By the doors, a group of students paused to observe the exchange. One of them, a tall girl with an expensive cello case slung over her shoulder, smirked. Melanie's voice rang out again, loud enough to ensure everyone heard. "Mr. Grant, please remind your staff that service personnel should use the back corridors once guests arrive. We can't have cleaning crews wandering through during a Chopin competition again." Isabella's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. These small humiliations had become as routine as dusting the trophy shelves. Every word, every sideways glance was another reminder of her place, always just outside the circle, always unseen. Later that afternoon, as she polished the brass railing of the grand staircase, Isabella paused. From behind a partially open, practice room door, the halting notes of a frustrated student echoed into the corridor. A girl, maybe 12, was struggling through a piece, tripping over the same run of arpeggios again and again. Without thinking, Isabella whispered just loud enough for herself, "Relax your wrist more. Let the hand fall through the notes." The girl inside turned suddenly, having heard her. Before anything else could be said, Melanie appeared beside her student like a storm rolling in. "Did you just instruct my pupil?" she asked coldly. "I'm sorry, Isabella started. "You just what?" Melanie's voice cut like glass. "You thought your experience with cleaning supplies made you an expert on piano technique?" Laughter bubbled behind her words, like poison. Isabella lowered her gaze. "No, ma'am. Then I suggest you stick to the mop and bucket." The door closed sharply in her face. She stood motionless for a second, the faint scent of polish lingering in the air. Then, wordlessly, she turned back to the railing. Her fingers brushed its cool metal surface, and as they moved, they began silently replaying the passage the student had struggled with, smoothing the notes in her mind, correcting the rhythm, resolving the dissonance. Her audience. No one, and yet in that small, quiet moment she played. The night of the Rosehill Conservatory's annual fundraising gala arrived in a flurry of activity. The marble floors gleamed under Isabella's careful polishing, each surface reflecting the golden chandeliers above like quiet stars. Every chair had been aligned with mathematical precision. Every silver tray, every centerpiece of fresh orchids stood in flawless order. The evening would welcome the conservatory's most important benefactors, patrons whose donations determined which departments thrived and which quietly faded away. Isabella moved through the reception hall, unnoticed as always, making last-minute adjustments to the floral arrangements when the doors flew open. Melanie Sharp stormed in, her phone clutched to her ear, her steps quick and frantic across the floor. "What do you mean you're in urgent care?" she snapped, her voice echoing under the high ceiling. "The gala begins in less than an hour. Maya." Isabella froze mid-step. Melanie turned her back to the staff and pressed a hand over one ear, trying to hear the response on the other end of the line. Her expression darkened. "Shellfish allergy? Tonight? You have to be kidding me. There's no way you can perform." There was a pause. "Yes, I understand, but—" Another pause, then a long, slow exhale. "All right. Take care of yourself," Melanie ended the call and stood perfectly still, her phone still in hand. A moment later, Mr. Grant stepped in, alarmed by the shift in energy. "Is everything all right, Ms. Sharp?" "She can't come," Melanie said flatly. "Maya's in the hospital. She ate something at lunch and had a severe reaction." Isabella, still standing by the orchids, pretended to adjust a vase as she listened. "She was supposed to be the main act," Melanie continued, pacing now. "The Harmony Trust specifically requested Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. No one else can handle that piece on such short notice." From across the room, Ethan Blake appeared. The young teaching assistant had always made a point to greet Isabella in the mornings, a simple "good to see you" or a kind nod that stood out. In a place where silence toward her was the norm, he stepped forward cautiously. "Ms. Sharp, I might have a suggestion." Melanie stopped pacing. "Unless Professor Bell has returned early from Vienna, I don't want to hear it." "It's not a faculty member," Ethan said, hesitating. "But I've heard someone here play that piece more than once with incredible skill." Melanie raised an eyebrow. "A student?" Ethan shook his head slightly and glanced toward Isabella, who was now motionless beside the banquet table, pretending not to hear. "No," he said. "Not a student. Isabella." The silence that followed was deafening. Melanie blinked. "The janitor? I've heard her play, after hours. She's remarkable." Across the room, all eyes turned toward Isabella. She remained still, as if unsure whether to run or disappear. One hand rested lightly on the tablecloth, the other clenched. By her side, Melanie was the first to react. A short, incredulous laugh burst from her lips, sharp and brittle like shattering glass. "You're serious?" she said, eyes narrowing. "You're actually suggesting that she—" She jabbed a manicured finger in Isabella's direction. "Perform one of the most demanding pieces in the romantic repertoire at our gala." Ethan didn't flinch. "Yes, I've heard her play it flawlessly." Mr. Grant looked uncomfortable. "Maybe we should—" "Don't be absurd," Melanie cut him off. "This is not an open mic night. It's a professional performance for benefactors." From behind her, the director of the conservatory, Dr. Veronica Lane, approached, sensing the rising tension. A former concert violinist, she had built a reputation on excellence and reputation, and tonight reputation was on the line. "What's happening?" she asked. Melanie turned toward her, voice measured now but tight with urgency. "Maya can't perform, allergic reaction. We have no replacement. And apparently," she glanced sideways at Ethan, "our janitorial staff has volunteered to take her place." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "Is that true?" All eyes landed on Isabella once more. She straightened slowly, eyes steady, though her heart pounded in her chest like a timpani drum. "I didn't volunteer," she said quietly. "But yes, I know the piece." The moment stretched. Veronica studied her for several seconds, longer than anyone at Rosehill had ever looked at Isabella Moore. "You're saying you can play Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, she said slowly and deliberately. "Yes, ma'am," Isabella replied. Her voice was calm now, centered. "I can," Melanie scoffed. "With what training? Watching YouTube tutorials during lunch breaks?" "I was accepted to the Grandmore School of Music," Isabella said, meeting Melanie's gaze for the first time. 15 years ago, but I didn't go. I had to stay home to take care of my grandmother. She taught me everything she knew." Veronica didn't speak immediately. The others waited for her reaction like a jury watching the judge. "Is this true?" she asked Ethan. He nodded. "I've heard her multiple times. She plays like someone who's trained for years." Before Veronica could respond, another voice joined the circle. It was Mr. Samuel Pierce, the chairman of the Harmony Trust, a tall man with a salt and pepper beard and a curiosity that rarely missed details. He had quietly entered the room during the exchange and now looked at Isabella with interest. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Veronica turned with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nothing serious. A last-minute adjustment to the program. Our scheduled pianist is unable to perform." Pierce raised an eyebrow. "And this is, our facility staff," Melanie said sweetly. "Who believes she can perform Liszt for our donors?" There was a beat of silence. "Well," Pierce said slowly, looking at Isabella from head to toe. Her worn sneakers, her gray uniform, the slight tremor in her hands. "That would certainly be unconventional." Melanie leaned in and whispered to him, though not quietly enough. "If she fails, we can spin it as a community engagement moment. If she's mediocre, it'll look generous. And if by some miracle she's passable, it'll be a heartwarming anecdote." Isabella stood still, silent. She wasn't being treated like a person. She was a novelty act, a curiosity, a fallback plan dressed in polyester. Veronica finally turned back to her. "You'll play tonight, one piece, the Liszt." Isabella took a breath. "And if I say no?" Veronica's expression hardened just a degree. "Then we'll have to reevaluate your position here. Budget cuts are looming, I'm afraid. I'm sure you understand." For the first time in years, Isabella felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, but clarity. This wasn't about just playing a piece of music. This was about whether she would stay hidden or finally be seen. She nodded once. "I'll play." The grand hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers and hushed anticipation. Silk gowns rustled, cufflinks gleamed, and champagne flutes caught the light like small beacons of privilege. At the edge of the stage, behind a velvet curtain, Isabella stood completely still. Her hands were cold. The name tag pinned to her gray uniform, Isabella M., seemed to glow under the backstage lights, a silent announcement of everything she was not. Out front, Dr. Veronica Lane stepped to the microphone with the poise of a seasoned performer. Her voice floated through the speakers, rich and theatrical. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a slight change to our evening's program." She began with a polished smile. "Our scheduled pianist unfortunately encountered a medical emergency and will not be joining us tonight." A low murmur rolled across the audience, polite confusion mixed with mild irritation. Veronica continued, her tone now dipped in careful diplomacy. "However, in the spirit of our community initiatives here at Rosehill, we are pleased to present a unique demonstration of how music can reach across backgrounds and roles. One of our own maintenance staff has graciously agreed to fill in this evening." There was a flicker of disbelief in the crowd, a few scattered laughs, quickly stifled. Backstage, Melanie stood with arms crossed, a pleased smirk tugging at her. Booth. To her, this was a show within a show, a perfectly controlled disaster ripe for ridicule. Isabella stepped forward. As she emerged from the shadows, the hall quieted further. Her sneakers made the faintest squeak against the hardwood stage floor. Under the stage lights, her uniform looked even more out of place, a dull gray against a backdrop of opulence. Whispers spread like brushfire through the room. She approached. The Ravenscroft grand piano, its ebony surface gleaming like a mirror. For a moment she hesitated, her reflection staring back at her, out of uniform, out of place, out of breath. In the third row, a gentleman leaned toward his companion and muttered, "This should be interesting." Isabella sat. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. She did not look at the audience. She did not look at the faculty or the students lining the walls, or Melanie's knowing smirk in the wings. She closed her eyes, and, in that darkness, she was 13 again, seated next to her grandmother at a weathered, upright piano in a one-bedroom apartment. The old woman's voice was gentle, her fingers stiff from arthritis but still capable of magic. "Music isn't about impressing the world," she had said. "It's about remembering who you are when the world forgets." Isabella inhaled slowly. Then, she played. The first notes rose from the piano like a question suspended in mid-air, uncertain only for a breath, then resolute, clear, undeniable. Isabella's fingers moved with startling precision, not tentative as the audience expected, but deliberate and commanding. The playful opening of Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 danced across the keys, each phrase shaped with intention, each tempo shift handled with effortless grace. A hush fell over the room. The low murmurs stopped. The silver-haired donor in the front row leaned forward, her expression shifting from polite tolerance to genuine interest. Near the back, a man with a small notebook stopped mid-sentence. Leonard Bryce, a prominent music critic who had attended merely out of obligation, now sat frozen, eyes narrowing in disbelief. The energy in the room changed. Isabella leaned into the more lyrical passages with a tenderness that made the air thicken. Her posture relaxed, yet precise. Her body swayed ever so slightly with the rhythm, not for show but because she felt it, lived it. Her face, once dulled by years of invisibility, was now radiant with focus and fire. Melanie, still standing behind the curtain, had stopped smiling. Her arms slowly uncrossed, her jaw clenched. The rhapsody built, gaining speed and complexity, thundering into its notoriously difficult cadenzas. Isabella's fingers blurred as they raced down the keyboard, and yet every note was clean, articulate, deeply felt. She wasn't just playing the music, she was telling it, giving it shape and soul. In the third movement's galloping section, the audience began to shift forward in their seats, breath caught in collective suspension. The chandeliers above shimmered not from light, but from the resonance of every chord she struck. People who had moments earlier smirked at the janitor's recital now clutched the edges of their seats, as if to hold on. Jason, Ethan, stood near the side wall, unmoving. His eyes shone not with surprise but with vindication. He had believed. Now everyone else had to. The final run, furious, flamboyant, electrifying, swept through the hall like a storm. Isabella's arms moved with a strength that had once carried mops and lifted supply boxes, now commanding one of the most virtuosic pieces in the classical canon. And then, silence. 3 full seconds passed. No one moved. Then the applause erupted. First hesitant, like the crowd couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Then it swelled, roared, exploded into a standing ovation that echoed off marble columns and vaulted ceilings. Some clapped, others shouted bravo, and more than a few wiped tears from their cheeks. Isabella remained seated for a moment longer, chest rising and falling, fingers still resting on the keys. When she finally stood and bowed, just a small, humble motion, the applause grew louder, as if those watching needed to say, "We were wrong. We see you now." From the crowd, Victor Hale, the esteemed conductor, made his way toward the stage. But Isabella didn't notice, not yet. She had played not to impress, not to redeem, but to remember, to reclaim something that had never really left her. And in doing so, she had changed everything. As the applause finally began to fade, Isabella stepped back from the piano, her breath still uneven, her heart pounding with something deeper than adrenaline. She didn't bask in the ovation. She didn't scan the room for validation. She simply stood there, hands by her sides, as though waiting to wake from a dream. Then a voice called out, clear and commanding from near the front of the hall. "Wait." Heads turned. The speaker was Victor Hale, a world-renowned conductor whose presence at the gala had been advertised as a silent endorsement of the conservatory's excellence. He was already halfway up the steps to the stage, his silver hair immaculate, his eyes locked on Isabella. She paused. "Where did you study?" he asked, his voice carrying effortlessly across the now silent room. "I didn't," Isabella said, barely louder than a whisper, though somehow it reached every corner of the hall. Victor blinked, clearly taken aback. "Not formally?" She shook her head. "My grandmother taught me at home." He stepped closer. "Margaret Moore." "Yes." Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied it. "She played with the National Philharmonic in the 70s. She raised me. When I was accepted into Granmore, she had a stroke the same week. I stayed to take care of her. After she passed, we had medical bills. I couldn't afford to go back." The hall remained quiet, deep, reverent quiet. Not one cough, not one rustle of fabric. From the side of the stage, Dr. Veronica Lane appeared again, her professional smile back in place, though more forced now. "What a touching story," she said. "A wonderful reminder of the hidden talents that walk among us." Isabella turned her gaze to her, not sharp, not confrontational, but firm. "It's not a story," she said softly. "It's my life." The words cut deeper than any retort could have. For the first time, Veronica had no response. At the back of the hall, Tiffany Lynn, executive director of the Harmony Reach Foundation, had been observing quietly. Now she approached the stage with purpose, her eyes shining with a spark of something new. Possibility. "Ms. Moore," she said as she stepped beside Victor, "our foundation has been developing a new initiative, a music program for underprivileged youth. We've been searching for someone who not only understands musical excellence, but also understands real-world barriers." Victor added, "Someone who has lived it. Someone who can teach not just notes and timing, but resilience." Isabella's breath caught. "You mean teach?" Tiffany nodded. "And perform, lead, mentor. We want you to help shape this program. Train students from communities that don't have access to instruments or conservatories. Inspire them the way your grandmother inspired you." Isabella didn't know what to say. Her hands, moments ago dancing across the keys with confidence, now trembled at her sides. From across the hall, Ethan watched it all unfold, a small smile playing at his lips. He caught her eye and raised a glass of sparkling water in silent salute. "Thank you," Isabella said to him when he joined her backstage later. "You spoke up when no one else would." "You earned it," he said simply. "All I did was stop pretending you were invisible." Elsewhere in the hall, Melanie stood alone near the refreshments, her posture stiff, her circle of admirers having drifted away. She watched as Isabella was surrounded by patrons, students, musicians, all eager to speak with her, shake her hand, ask about her journey. Their eyes no longer slid past her uniform. They met her gaze, sought her out. The power in the room had shifted, not with a crash, but like a tide turning, quiet, certain, unstoppable. 3 months later, the hallways of Rosehill Conservatory looked much the same. Marble floors, gold-trimmed doors, echoing footsteps between towering practice rooms. But to Isabella Moore, everything felt different. She no longer pushed a cart of cleaning supplies. Instead, she carried sheet music in one arm, a satchel of lesson plans over her shoulder. Her clothes were still simple, her shoes still practical, but there was no name tag on her chest. She didn't need one anymore. The morning light spilled through the reception hall as she passed by the same Ravenscroft piano, where everything had changed. Veronica Lane stood across the room, speaking with 2 donors. She caught Isabella's eye and offered a small nod. Isabella returned it, a gesture of quiet, mutual recognition. Not friendship, but respect. Some lessons took time. In the East Wing, where classrooms had once sat unused, the new Music Within Reach program had come to life. 8 students now waited in Practice Room E, kids between 12 and 17, from neighborhoods where music programs had long been cut, where pianos were luxuries behind store windows, not in living rooms. They looked up when Isabella entered. Some wore guarded expressions, others clutched their notebooks tightly. They were skeptical, unsure whether this place truly had room for them. She smiled. "My grandmother used to say that music isn't about who you are to the world," she told them, pulling out the piano bench, "but who you are when the world falls away." She placed her fingers on the keys. The same notes that had stunned a room full of patrons now echoed through this modest space. Not for applause, not to prove anything, but because this was who she was. The music flowed from her with warmth and conviction. The students watched in silence, their eyes slowly widening, their shoulders dropping. Something in them shifted. Hope doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing sneakers. Later that afternoon, as Isabella packed up her materials, a student named Noah lingered near the piano. "Ms. Moore," he asked hesitantly, "did they really not let you study? Because you didn't have the money?" She nodded. "That's right." He looked down at his hands. "So that could happen to me too?" She crouched beside him. "Maybe. But now, we're going to make sure that's not the end of your story." Out in the courtyard, a small group of students rehearsed with borrowed instruments. The program was still new, still finding its rhythm. But it existed. And for many of them, it was the first time someone had looked at them and seen more than limitations. As Isabella walked back through the conservatory one last time that day, she passed the portrait of a stern-faced composer. It had hung crooked for years. She straightened it with the same hands that had once wiped it clean, hands no longer hidden, no longer silent. That night, alone in her apartment, she opened an old music journal filled with notes from her teenage years. She turned to a blank page and began to write, not to the world, to herself. Somewhere right now, someone like Isabella is mopping a hallway, taking orders, being overlooked, yet carrying inside them a gift, waiting for the right moment, the right key, the right stage. How many of them will never be seen? How many will remain in the shadows because of what they wear, where they come from, or who people assume they are? But not Isabella. Not anymore. If Isabella's story moved you, it's because it reminds us of something deeply true. That greatness doesn't always walk in wearing a suit or carrying a diploma. Sometimes it enters through a side door, wearing a faded uniform, with hands that have scrubbed floors and hearts that have waited silently for their moment. Maybe you've been overlooked. Maybe someone's judged you by your clothes, your job, or your silence. Or maybe you've seen someone surprise the world, someone who wasn't supposed to shine, and yet did. Tell us your story. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever Watch someone defy expectations and reveal a gift that left everyone stunned? Share in the comments below. You never know who your words might inspire. And if this story touched your heart, help us keep sharing moments like these. Real, human, powerful. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the Worthy Stories channel. We're so close to 1,000 storytellers in this community, and you could be the one who helps us reach that next milestone.